here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Friday, May 3rd, 2013 here. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about here today. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. The lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3, as she does every week. A couple of quick program notes. Of course, Monday, our on-air guest will be Diane McGilvery, who we're having her on to talk about this wonderful series of commercials. They are an advertising client of the Republic Broadcasting Network, and unlike most advertisers, they're spending most of their commercials talking about important issues. And then at the very end, they say, you know, their company name and the rest of it. And it shows a tremendous amount of social responsibility. And so I wanted to have Diane on the show to talk about that. Tuesday, Pepe Escobar will be our on-air guest, Brazilian investigative journalist. Writes for all kinds of blogs. We've linked to a lot of his work from whatreallyhappened.com, talking about current events with him. Now, obviously, the big news today over on the corporate media is the stock market hit fresh milestones. The Dow touched 15,000. The S&P topped 1,600. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. Right about now, I'm sure that the boardrooms of Wall Street are looking like the orgy scene from Eyes Wide Shut. They're just so happy. They got a bigger number, you know. And I'd like to read you a little quote. This is a quote. Stock prices have reached what looks like a permanently high plateau. This was said by economist Irving Fisher following the peak of the stock market. It set a record on September 3rd, 1929. 37 days later, the stock market crashed, sending the nation into the Great Depression. Now, these stock prices we're seeing, and everybody is celebrating, and the corporate media is saying, see, the economy is good. If you're hungry and homeless and jobless, it's really your own fault. Don't point the finger of blame at that Ponzi scheme central bank or the government. We're doing our job. Look at the Dow. The Dow proves everything is just fine here. But these stock prices are not being driven up by value of the underlying stock and the businesses that issue them, but by inflation. You're seeing an inflationary price spiral because the Federal Reserve is still engaged in quantitative easing. And they announced this week they're going to keep on doing this. They just create all this new money out of thin air, and they just hand it over to Wall Street at virtually zero cost of borrowing. And the Wall Street investors go out and they buy more stocks. And it drives the prices up like any classic inflationary spiral. When you have too much cash chasing too few goods, or in this case, piece of paper, the price is going to go up. And so all of this instant created money from the Federal Reserve pouring onto Wall Street is pumping up the price, but not the underlying value of the stocks. And we know this when we compare the value of the stock market versus the price of gold. Because if American businesses were truly generating new wealth, real wealth, you would expect to see stocks gain in value over gold, which is merely a static store of wealth. But looking at the charts, and we put them up at whatreallyhappened.com, although the stock prices may appear higher due to the Fed's inflation on Wall Street, no actual increase in wealth is taking place. Only the numbers are changing. And they're out there saying, huzzah, huzzah, the numbers are great here. And when the corporate media starts treating the Dow like it's a sports score, you know you're in big, big, big trouble. Now, as we were talking about yesterday, suicide has become a major problem in the United States of America. And not just for our veterans and serving people. More Americans are now killing themselves than die in highway accidents. And all of this is linked to the economic downturn and the absence of a real recovery. And so the corporate media is out there saying, oh, we've got to stop the bombers. They killed 3 people. Well, Wall Street is killing 40,000 Americans a year, driving them to suicide. Why aren't we holding them to account? We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about the economy today. And interestingly enough, Alan Greenspan, now that he is no longer the chairman of the Federal Reserve, he's started making a lot of public appearances and basically talking about what was going on inside the Federal Reserve. And last weekend, just about a week ago, made some very startling remarks about what was going on before this whole crash began. in which he essentially admitted that the Federal Reserve saw the 1990s bubble coming and decided rather than trying to deal with it, they could have taken steps, but they just decided to let it run its course. Now, we know why. Because in a nation that has lost most of its manufacturing and most of its agriculture, Wall Street makes its money riding the bubbles. They'll get something like, well, the mortgage-backed securities. They'll pump it up. It'll start upward. Everybody buys in. The insiders sell out at the top. The whole thing crashes. It doesn't produce a useful product. Doesn't make anything we can export. All it is a scam, a pump and dump on a national scale to loot money from casual investors, ordinary citizens trying to 401ks, pension plans got suckered on that last one, and transfer the wealth to Wall Street. And Greenspan is basically saying when they saw the bubble of the 1990s starting to happen, they chose not to do anything about it. They just let it run. Why? Because they're all invested in the companies that make money off these bubbles. I'm forever blowing bubbles, so forth and so on. Now, more developments over at J.P. Morgan. And we know J.P. Morgan's really been in the news because of Jamie Dimon, and he was out there screaming, oh, all this stuff about trading, you know, that's just, he called it a tempest in a teapot, and it really didn't work out too well. And since then, J.P. Morgan has gotten a lot of its key players into government positions that are basically going to isolate it from any prosecutions for all of these scams that they're doing. But there is a new development. Because on March 13th, okay, the day before Carl Levin's committee released its latest report on JPM's prop trading blunder, is what they're calling it. It was another scam. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission released allegations that J.P. Morgan, over the last several years, has started to become the new Enron. Now, if you're not familiar with Enron, you can go out there, E-N-R-O-N, you can web search it. There's a wonderful documentary about it called The Smartest Guys in the Room. It was just nothing short of a complete scam against its investors, against its customers. You probably remember what Enron did to the state of California with energy manipulation schemes. Now, apparently, government investigators have found that J.P. Morgan Chase, following the collapse of Enron, started moving into the same, what they're calling manipulative schemes. They bought up power plants that were losing money, and by manipulating energy shortages and prices, turned them into powerful profit centers. They caught the senior executives giving false and misleading statements under oath. And so it's another, Jamie Dimon will say, it's another tempest in a teapot. Everybody does it. Enron did it. Of course we can do it. And, of course, this comes hard on the heels of allegations from the independent media that J.P. Morgan Chase inherited some massive silver shorts when it was handed over Bear Stearns. And those short positions have encouraged J.P. Morgan Chase executives like Blythe Masters to do everything in their power to push the price of gold and silver lower, and to align directly with the Federal Reserve, which wants nothing more than to destroy every single last believer in real currency versus these paper-based illusions of money. And by the way, I hate to say I told you so, but I did tell you so. Arizona Governor Jan Brewer vetoed the Arizona bill making gold and silver legal tender. The excuse she gave for doing it is that it might result in lost tax revenues to the state. We know what the real issue is. You don't get a job as a U.S. Senator by ticking off the Federal Reserve. Remember when the bill finally passed earlier in the week, and it went to Jan Brewer's desk, and I said, I'm not willing to bet she's going to sign it. And she's probably getting all these phone calls from Wall Street saying, you know, you kill this and we will help you leave the governorship and go to Washington, D.C. And you mark my words, when she's done being governor, she's going to get that trip to Washington, D.C. Because that's how the money junkies operate. All righty, let's see. We're going to grab a phone call here. Kent in West Virginia. Aloha, Kent. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, about this Greenspan. I hear people talking, I don't know whether you heard you talk about it. Some people talk about this book, Atlas Shrugged, and apparently Greenspan was a great disciple of that book. You know, that was like his Bible or something. And I've often thought, well, there was a man, you know, Atlas had the world over his shoulders and shrugged. Well, there was a man who had the whole United States economy on his shoulders, and he chose to shrug. So I think that's, you know, I think that's where it comes from.
Well, that's because the current crop of Wall Street executives who are all very much part of this private banking cartel, they're not thinking what's good for the nation and good for the American people. They just want more profit. We have Alan Greenspan on video during the 100th celebration of the creation of the Federal Reserve admitting massive fraud was taking place. And he says, you know, the problem is we don't know who to trust, but that was the extent of his concern about the fraud, not the lives that were looted, the businesses that were destroyed, the nation's infrastructure that was allowed to rot because all of the surplus wealth in the nation was being sucked up by this pyramid scheme central bank. And we have a second videotape of Alan Greenspan out there saying the Federal Reserve is answerable to no federal government authority. They are above the law. And they are not in business to take care of the nation, to serve the public, to serve anything other than themselves. They're in the business to make money and loot it as much as possible from the American people.
Yeah, I had heard that somewhere I read that, you know, the attorneys general were coming to him, complaining and informing him of what was going on and everything, and asking him to, and he, you know, he just shrugged and said, well, I can't do anything about it, or that's for you to deal with or something, or you wouldn't take any responsibility whatsoever.
And then when the attorneys generals tried to do something about it during the foreclosure fraud scandal, the Obama administration came in and arm-twisted the state's attorneys generals to drop all criminal investigations, and they came up with this, you know, foreclosure fraud settlement deal, which wrist-slapped Wall Street, and every American who had their home stolen through Wall Street fraud got a check for a whole $300, and some of those checks actually bounced. So, I mean, that's, you know, again, the classic definition of a fascist economic dictatorship is when government power and financial corporate power are aligned together against the general population. People, we are there right now.
We definitely are. Well, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. Now then, we're hearing that small businesses are starting to sue the Internal Revenue Service over Obamacare. And the plaintiffs are saying basically the IRS regulations amount to financial injury and restrictions of their economic choices. They declare them as arbitrary and capricious, and they really are. And so they're starting to sue and say this violates all kinds of other laws that are supposed to protect businesses from undue outside influences. And apparently this is focusing on the so-called healthcare exchanges, which the government does not actually have the authority to force states to set them up, but they're using money to bribe states to set them up. And by the way, when you look at this so-called jobs report for last month that is being touted as the reason for the surge on the stock market, they keep mentioning healthcare, because every medical office in the United States of America are having to hire people to simply process all this new added Obamacare paperwork. You do not grow an economy by hiring two people to stamp papers and hand them to each other over and over and over again. That's just legislating jobs out of nothing. And none of this is productive. None of this is ultimately going to be good for the economy in the long run. It's just creation of jobs for the sake of creation of jobs. And it's not bringing back our manufacturing. It's not restoring our agriculture. It's not even restoring our infrastructure. It's just make work. Oh, I'm processing Obamacare payment. You know, do you have a college degree for that here? Now, we saw this interesting article over an activist post about how the international money flow is tightening. And they're really basically laying out what's going on over in Europe. And many times before, I've described the European situation as a large wooden boat, and there's a seat for every member nation, and under every member nation's seat, there's a hole in the bottom of the boat through which water can pour. And they have one less cork than they have holes. And so everything they're doing to try and keep Europe going amounts to yanking a cork out of one hole, shoving it into another hole in full view of the press cameras while saying, we're working on the problem. But the water still comes in and it's still sinking. So I want to read you a quote from this article from Activist Post. The EU continues its chainsaw juggling act. The austerity pledge from France is holding about as well as the Maginot Line. While Greece has sworn to meet its fiscal targets in 2014, 2015, 2016, soon, and the Italians promise they're going to do something about their economy as soon as everybody comes back from holiday. Spain reassures that it will squarely confront its needs to raise worker productivity whenever the unions call for an end to the protests against austerity, and it runs in a circle over and over again. But that is not the problem, and we will be right back with why. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're talking about this article over on Activist Post about how the international money flow is tightening. Now, first of all, there's a limited scope on this story because they're talking only about the nations with the private central banks. And the reason for that is as that debt pyramid continues to grow, more and more of the wealth of the nation is simply being grabbed to make the payments on that debt. That leaves insufficient currency in circulation for job creation and commerce. And until some leader of any of these nations with these private central banks issuing the public currencies alone at interest dares to stand up and say this is the problem, there is no solution. Everything that they're doing is simply to placate the public that they're working on the problem. Please donate to my campaign and vote me into office again. But the situation cannot be salvaged until somebody is willing to do an Andrew Jackson and say, you are a den of vipers and I will rout you out. Corporate media is still going on and on about the job creation and in healthcare and everything. And again, it's just all the people that are being forced to be hired to process all the new added Obamacare paperwork, and the cost of that gets put onto the patients. They're always going to be made to pay for all of this stuff. Your average doctor today spends as much time filling out government forms as they do seeing the patients. That's not quality health care there. Basically, Obama is trying to solve the job problem in this country by giving everybody a 30-pound rock and paying them to walk around in circles. That's their entire policy here. We're going to grab a couple of phone calls. Joe in Indiana. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael, and thank you for taking my call, and your timing couldn't be better because I just wanted to go on a little bit about the EMR, this electronic medical records, and what's happening to some of my colleagues and friends. Some of them have gone ahead and taken the government money to try to implement the electronic medical record, and what's happening is it takes so long to get through it that one of my friends, the PA, was mentioning how they've had to reduce the number of patient loads that they're reviewing every day because it takes so long to get through the EMR records. It's really becoming a nightmare, and the promised money that, the government tried to entice a lot of doctors to get on board with a certain amount of money, but it's actually costing 3, 4, 5 times more. And one of the neurologists that we're friends with, he was saying that it costs over $300,000 to convert their whole medical center to the EMR, and they have to hire a full-time scribe just to follow the doctors around. So now, not only did they have this huge fee just to get on board with the EMR, they have to hire a full-time scribe. They may need even 2 to follow the doctors around just to take the notes, and his job is just to put the materials into the record. So it's really a nightmare, and the doctors are actually going to see less patients. So it just letting you know. Plus there's the IT department that you have to hire to deal with all the new computational equipment. There's sadly the potential for high failure rates within the software itself. And the hardware. The biggest problem I have with this push to computerize all medical records is it makes the records non-permanent. And that means that if a doctor screws up your treatment and you are injured or you are killed, you or your survivors go to a lawyer and say, we want to sue the doctors, and the doctors say, well, here, look at the computerized medical record. I didn't do anything wrong. And it's basically an across-the-board protection of the medical industry from future malpractice lawsuits.
And we've seen all these horrible mistakes that they're making under the press of time and paperwork. There was this doctor that operated on the wrong side of somebody's brain just a couple of weeks ago. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, not to mention the problem that you're going to have, that these records really cannot guarantee the security of these records, because the commercials that you see on television try to show how wonderful these things are going to be, that somebody who's off in Oregon can obtain medical records from somebody who lives in Boston and maybe on vacation. But the problem is, if they get hacked, somebody's going to have every single piece of information about you, your entire profile, not to mention all your Social Security numbers and all your life insurance and all that sort of information. But
absolutely. One youthful indiscretion in your childhood, and future employers are going to say, oh, this person got treated for blah, 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 blah. We can't have people of such low moral character. It's going inevitably. We're seeing a government right now that views privacy of the American citizen as a null and void issue. That's one of the things coming out of this whole Boston Marathon thing. We're going to be talking about that in a little bit. Anything else, Joe?
That's it. Thank you very much, Michael. I appreciate it.
You got it. We're going to switch over to Olaf in Minnesota. Aloha, Olaf. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
Okay. Alan Greenspan is actually, his real name is Ole Olafsson, and he's from Yankovik, Iceland.
Okay.
And I think the Iceland people are taking over our planet.
I wish they would, because the Icelanders had the right idea dealing with the mortgage-backed security fraud. They threw those bankers in jail. They fired the government that helped them do it. They wrote off all the debt created through fraud, and they're off and running a lot better than we are. Thank you for the call. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. A couple more factors about the economy and the soaring Dow, and they're all just absolutely orgasmic that the Dow hit 15,000. Happy days are here again. And the reality is quite something else, because they're talking about all these new jobs that were created, and what they're not mentioning is what happened to median wages and salaries, which went down. And so the reality is, for all the new jobs that were created, the amount of money collectively being paid to the American workforce declined. You're working harder, you're working more, and you're getting less for it. Now, the other numbers that came out today and are not being talked about by the corporate media, factory orders are down. Durable goods numbers were revised downward again from March. They were bad in March, and they said, well, it was actually worse. So the actual indicators of America's productivity actually went down, and the Dow is soaring. And the reason is, as we said at the top of the show, it's inflation on Wall Street. The Federal Reserve is creating all this new money that is loaned to the Wall Street investment firms for virtually nothing. And these Wall Street firms go out to the stock market and they buy up huge blocks of stocks, and the demand sends the Dow soaring, but it's not improving the underlying value. When priced against gold, the Dow is still in a decline. It's just another way of fudging the numbers to make it look good. And the corporate media is going to say, just pay attention to that 15,000. That's all you need to look at. Look at all those zeros. 1, 5, 3 zeros, 15. That's all you need to look at. Don't pay attention to the actual factory orders. Don't pay attention to the manufacturing. Don't pay attention to the fact that all those new jobs were created were mostly paper shuffling, ordered into existence by the government. And pay no attention to the fact that the actual amount of money being paid to Americans for all those new jobs and for all the existing jobs has gone down. Don't pay attention to that. If you pay attention to those numbers, the terrorists are going to win. And while they're catching their breath between gasping about the 15,000 Dow, the corporate media is, of course, continuing its Bostonophon. And they're out there, again, still trying to keep that in the public eye. Oh, the bombers were going to set off their bombs on July 4th, and they only moved it up earlier because it didn't take as long to build the bombs as they thought it was going to do, which lacks plausibility in my mind, given the simplicity of what it is we are being told that they did. They're trying to revive Sandy Hook and link it into that. The gun grabbers are back for the full court press. Meanwhile, of course, Sibel Edmonds continues to make the links between the Boston bombing suspects and this CIA-backed terrorist group in Chechnya. And even more interesting, Sibel Edmonds has come out with information that the United States government and NATO continued to work with Osama bin Laden and his number 2, Ayman al-Zawahiri, for 3 months after 9/11 to coordinate the destabilization of the Caucasus region. Of course, we know that 3 months after 9/11 is when Osama bin Laden actually died. The real one died. So that is now surfacing. It's all frauds and lies. Now, apparently some documents have surfaced revealing Homeland Security was involved in this Boston bombing. At least in part, they were helping to provide the actors and props for the bomb drill that was taking place at the same time the real bombing was going on. And that many of these so-called wounded victims that were presented during the initial media coverage seem to have gone away. Even the corporate media can't find them. There are, they found the few real injured and wounded people, but everybody else who was there can't find them, can't track them down, can't even find their names anywhere. Now, John Kaminsky came out with a very interesting article, False Flag Terror Tricks, Freedom's Death Sentence. And it's basically going on along the same theme that I wrote in my article, Fake Terror, The Road to War and Dictatorship. And it reminds me of that quote from the third Star Wars movie, Revenge of the Sith, where Padme is saying, "This is how liberty dies," to thunderous applause. And if you go over to my website, I took that quote and I put it over a photo of those people in Boston holding the flag and cheering USA, USA. And by the way, it's not a large crowd. You could get a crowd that size just running an ad in the back of Billboard magazine. And by the way, we have documented where the government literally goes out to actors, trade journals, and has a casting call for people to come into Obama's town halls or various other events and act like the crowd, and they get paid and they get a box lunch and they get to go home. Going to grab a phone call here. John in Utah. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I'm just calling. I'm a first-time caller to your show, but I've listened for several months and I really enjoy your program. My call is regarding something that you had said off and on about the potential for a false flag cyber attack against the banking system to divert attention from the to provide cover for the collapse of the derivatives markets.
Yes.
And I work for a U.S. government agency without naming any other information, and I'm in an IT capacity. And we received warning just yesterday about an attack by Anonymous on government offices, computer systems, and also that of financial institutions. And I don't know how much mainstream press this might be getting, if any, but it's just something you might be. I just want to make you aware of, your listeners, that there is this potential.
Yes. And my question, of course, would be, how would they know it's coming from Anonymous versus, for example, the Israelis or anybody else on the planet? And the fact that they're naming a potential suspect is itself suspect.
Yeah. Well, supposedly Anonymous had put this out on Pastebin, and the post here names various web URLs that they're going to target 122 banks around the list.
Okay, well, that tells you it's all about that tells you it's about propaganda. And let me explain why. And John, just give me a minute here to finish this thought, and I'll come back to you. Most computer criminals are after money, and they go out and they steal your identity, they break into your system, and they don't want you to know they're doing it, because the longer they can keep you from finding out what they're doing, the more money they can make. I have always been very concerned that Anonymous is, in fact, another intelligence operation, because everything they do is about attracting attention to themselves. And they engage in tasks that don't earn them any money whatsoever. And so for Anonymous to come out and say, we're going to do this and we're going to do that, basically tells me they're just trying to attract attention so that they can put out in the corporate media, oh, those evil hackers, they're coming after our computer systems. And again, it could easily be a propaganda run-up to a virtual 9/11, which would get the government and the Federal Reserve off the hook for all that they've done, assuming the American people bought the official story. And I think Boston is showing us that that's a very questionable assumption for anybody who's doing the planning right now.
Yes, and to go along with what you just said, I believe that government intelligence agencies have had their hooks in the Internet at its choke points for years, and that they would be in best position to go masquerading as a so-called anonymous group.
Oh, there's no question. There's no question they can do that. We know, we know that most of the commercial operating systems are already compromised. There was that huge scandal over the NSA key in Microsoft Windows about 10 years back. I think at this point we can presume that anything you're buying from the store that's got computers in there is already compromised on behalf of the government. There was the FBI's Magic Lantern program, which was then cloned by real computer criminals and used to commit crimes with. We know that if you have a smartphone, that a microphone for the speakerphone mode can be switched on without your knowing. We know that they can come in and use the GPS in the smartphone to keep an eye on you, where you're going. Yeah, it's already compromised. But my point with the virtual 9/11 is there is no way they can keep this economy going the way it is unless they're willing to look at the problems with the theory of private central banking. And they're not willing to do that because they're getting too big a piece of the action. So at the point where somebody decides we can't keep this together any longer, Europe starts to fall apart, the derivatives come due, I really do expect the federal government to attack the computer systems of the financial center themselves, blame Iran or China or North Korea or the Minnesotans for it, and say, oh, look, the Dow was up. We were just on the verge of turning this economy around, but those dastardly insert name here attacked and destroyed our banking system computers. And instead of being the result of decades of crime and corruption and fraud, now it's an act of war, and they push the war agenda along with it. I think it's a very real possibility. And the advantage of a virtual 9/11 is it will affect everybody in the United States. Everybody will directly be impacted. It's not like the first 9/11 where if you were in New York you felt it, and if you were anywhere outside of New York it was horrific but distant. And a virtual 9/11 is going to be felt immediately by everybody. The ATMs won't be working. They can't get their money out of the bank. And the corporate media will be out there screaming, oh, it was the Iranian hackers, it was this, it was the Saudis, it was whoever it is they want to blame and start it. Basically, they'll say it was all the Muslims everywhere. Every Muslim's a hacker. Go kill them for us.
Great. I think we'll keep our eyes out for this.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for that inside information, and please call back again.
Thank you.
All right. Now, getting back to Boston. We are already seeing the political fallout from this. Apparently, the chief of police of New York, Ray Kelly, is out there actually saying that because of the Boston bombing, the privacy issue has been taken off the table. In other words, we, in the name of keeping security and protecting against terrorism, this idea that citizens have a right to privacy, that's off the table. Well, first of all, Chief Kelly, it's not an issue. It is a constitutional right. In that Fourth Amendment, you have no business looking at anything we, the American people, are doing unless you have evidence of an actual crime in progress. Otherwise, you stay the heck out. Remember we were talking earlier in the week about CNN's going on and on. If you've got nothing to hide, why should you care if we're looking at you? And, of course, the best response to that is, well, if you're doing nothing wrong, why can't we have the same access to all of your communications? Why are the police going around smashing cameras for taking videos of police in public when the courts have said it's legal to do, but the cops are still smashing the cameras? It's got to be a two-way street, but the attitude from the government is we need privacy to do our job, and you, the serfs and the slaves, we have got to be watching you at all times. We're going to put, we're going to take the roof off of your home and just put some bars to keep you in there so the drones overhead can keep an eye on you. And that's where they're going with this thing. They're trying to convince Americans that a right to privacy in their own homes and in their own dealings is really not in the national interest any longer. And the biggest reason for us to be concerned about our privacy is not because we're doing something bad. We may be doing something very good that somebody in the government will simply copy off and take for their own, or they'll get wind of what we're doing, a new product we're developing to try and make ourselves rich, and they'll go off to the stock market and they'll do some insider trading. And I've lost count of the number of these government officials who have been busted for insider stock trading on the basis of information they intercept when they're peeking into our lives. So now the FBI is after real-time, warrantless access to all online communication. They want to just be constantly scanning your email, your web pages, your text messages, whatever you're doing. Your sexting messages are now open season for the FBI, a bunch of dirty old men over there. And all of this, of course, is a violation of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America. And they want that to go away. Obama is apparently pushing for legislation that will punish Internet service providers who fail to immediately and fully cooperate with FBI requests to peek into somebody's Internet traffic. Now, what's really most interesting is it looks like they have been doing it all along, because there's this video from CNN talking about the Boston bombing, where they were talking about, just waiting for them to do a text message that could be scanned, and this FBI agent says, no, we have ways to go back and listen to their voice conversations from the last 2 weeks. And, of course, the CNN host completely ignored that comment, but what it tells us is all of your telephone traffic is being recorded and saved. So the FBI can go back and listen to what you're doing. We need to all start talking in code phrases. And, of course, that will lead to a lot of false positives. What does he mean by cupcakes? Might just really be cupcakes. Let's their imagination run wild and just presume the worst of everything that they're hearing here. We got some calls on the line here. I'm going to take them out of sequence and start with Ryan in Japan. Ohayou gozaimasu, Ryan. Or actually, it should be konbawa. Ryan, o genki desu ka?
It's 3 in the morning, so it's sort of night, sort of morning. Right?
All right, that's halfway between the two. If you're watching on Justin TV, I'm wearing that shirt that you sent me.
That's awesome. Stop all foreign aid to Israel. I noticed that. That's wonderful. Thanks, Mike.
What's on your mind?
Well, back when you were talking about a rent-a-crowd, I had another good example of that was the toppling of the Saddam Hussein statue, if you remember. They got busted completely in that, where they had a rent-a-crowd there, and they acted like it was the Jubilee Iraqis who were going to give us cake and everything, but actually they had armored vehicles blocking off everything to the park, and they had their own actors from the Palestinian hotel that they brought in, including Ahmed Chalabi and his goons. And if you look at the faces for the kids and stuff they hired to go in and kick the statue and hit it with shoes, it's the same people they used earlier on another hoaxer-type video called Pallywood, where they tried to say Palestinians were faking their deaths and things.
Yeah, I remember that.
I had a video on YouTube all about that. It's one of the ones that got erased.
Imagine my shock.
Yeah, me too. But, yeah, that's another rent-a-crowd, and no apology for that. The only time it was ever on MSN was Keith Olbermann brought it up like 5 years after the fact. And then, of course, where he is now.
Yeah, he kind of got banished into the Twilight Zone, along with the rest of us independent media people. Welcome, Keith. Welcome to our world. Ryan, do you have any more? Do you want to stay through the commercial break?
Well, I hear the music coming, so I'll let you go, but thanks for wearing the shirt.
All right, you got it. Thanks an awful lot. We'll be back with more phone calls. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to grab a couple more phone calls here. Sam in Missouri. Aloha, Sam. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, first-time caller, and just want to mention that I have been listening to your show for quite a while, and you were mentioning about the weather here in the United States here being abnormally cold. We're in Missouri, and in south-central Missouri, it's 39 degrees, and it's at 1 in the afternoon, so that's at May 3rd. So that should tell everybody just how cold it is in a lot of parts of the U.S., now. So so much for global warming. But,
yeah, they had snow all over. We were going to mention that later in the show. 15 inches of snow in some parts of the country, and of course the corporate media is out there talking about, California's got higher temperatures. That proves that global warming. California's got higher temperature. I'm sorry, California happens to be on fire. And when you have an entire mountain range on fire, it is going to warm things up around there. But they're out there saying, oh, there's warming in California. Pay no attention to the snow all over the rest of the United States of America. It's warm in California. And they're raising on a busted flush here. These are not people who can admit they were wrong or dishonest about human-caused global warming, and they're still going to go on pushing it, reaching reputation. It's a hard sell. And anything else?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on a comment that you made on yesterday's show, just referring to fascism versus socialism, and you made the statement that between the two you'd rather have socialism. My only problem with all of these isms is the fact that they're all government force doing something, like in the case, certainly fascism is business being the eyes and ears of government, to put it in a short term, and socialism is the forced redistribution of wealth from those who have to those who don't, and I just go back to the whole issue of government's not reason, it's force. And anytime you give government the power to take from some to give to those who don't have, that government is going to eventually start giving to things that don't deserve to be given to. And this is where I have a problem with the whole socialist philosophy, because it always evolves right back to similar to what we have now, which is really a hybrid of the two, really, because you got fascism, which is business being in bed with government right now. Of course, we have the ultimate fascist relationship, which was the Federal Reserve and government that goes back to when that was created. And so basically, my problem with the whole thing is you would still be right back where you started sooner or later. It wouldn't take long before corruption would set in, and then you get people like one of the things we got going on here as an example, Mike, is our local government decided that some within our local government on our park board decided they wanted to build a water park. Our swimming pool in this little tiny town of 2,500 was wearing out. They had leaks in the pool and all this kind of stuff. And of course, I have a problem, being that I was raised as a kid where my parents used their hard-earned money to get the things that I needed as a kid. I can count on my right hand the time I used a municipal pool. But I'm using this as an example, and the example that I'm holding out here is basically what they did. They voted, instead of just fixing the existing pool, they voted to come up with this lavish water park, all under the ideas that, it'll attract visitors, and, we can have these senior citizens days where seniors can come out at, between 11 and 12 noon.
Yeah, I wonder who got the contract for that. Listen, Sam, we got to let you go here. We got to take a break for station identification. I'm going to respond to some of the things you said when we come back from these few words. And aloha, American. Before we take the next phone call, I want to respond to Sam in Missouri. First of all, what I actually said was I would prefer to live in a capitalist nation as capitalism was originally practiced in this country, to incentivize work and achievement and development and otherwise leave people alone. Sam is correct that when you get into these fascist or socialistic systems, because the government is taking control of the people's economy, it is rife with corruption and deteriorates. Now, I don't see the United States as socialist. I know people talk about that a lot, but the reality is we live in a system where money is taken from people who don't have it to give to people who already do. And that is, of course, classic fascism. The other idea, and again, the Founding Fathers understood this danger. And that was the reason for what was called the apportionment clause in the Constitution. The Constitution declared it forbidden to have a direct, non-apportioned tax on the people. In other words, if the government was going to take money away from you, the American people, they had to return it to you in equal value for services to your community. They couldn't just suck it out of your community and decide to walk over someplace else and drop it on somebody else. That was written into the Constitution. And that was what made a personal income tax unconstitutional. It had been tried. The Supreme Court had struck it down. And that's why they were playing with all these fun and games about the 16th Amendment, which the money junkies claim overturned the prohibition against direct, non-apportioned taxes. Of course, it doesn't explicitly repeal that provision. And under the rules of the Constitution needing to be internally self-consistent, It doesn't actually do anything, and as a matter of fact, the United States court ruled in Stanton versus Baltic Mining that the 16th Amendment, even if it had been ratified, did not actually confer any new taxing authority on the U.S. government. So the Founding Fathers understood what Sam in Missouri was saying, and they did write a protection into the Constitution to protect the American people from a government that would assume for itself the right to take their money and simply give it someplace else. The proper function of government is to do for the community or the nation what the community or nation needs but cannot do for themselves. And we have definitely wandered away from that. Okay, back to the phones. James in Tokyo. I'm probably going to have to keep you over this next coming commercial break here, but what's on your mind?
I'll get over it, Mike, after a couple hours of therapy.
Okay.
First of all, it's great you had Ryan Dawson on. He's also in Japan. I hear him call your show once in a while. I don't really know him, but I exchange some Facebook messages with him once in a while, and he has great insight. He's kind of like a rough version of you without the scientific background and has great insight. So that's great you have him on your show a lot.
Well, thank you very much. And if you have your computer listening to our show, well, I'm not hearing the echo anymore, so I guess you turned the volume down. Ryan and I have known each other virtually. I've never met him physically face-to-face, but we've known each other virtually for many years. We first got involved when he was still living in the United States of America over the lost colony of Roanoke, which turned out it wasn't lost. They simply moved over to another colony and said, we want to hang out with you guys. And over time, he has become more and more politically aware, and he does a lot of good work, and he does a lot of really good videos. And it is a fact that we have caught YouTube deleting his videos and posting a notice removed by the user, but it wasn't removed by the user. It's removed because somebody called YouTube and said, you got to get that video off. We've caught them artificially suppressing the viewer numbers on his and other videos so that they never show up in the most popular lists. YouTube is very much controlled here, and it's going to get worse because of something about Boston. James, do you have any more? Do you want to stay through the commercial?
Yeah, I want to stay through.
All right, we'll come back to you after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're still talking with James in Tokyo. And James, you had another question.
Yes. First of all, would you believe that Al Gore said if it was that everybody would freeze to death in the Northwest if it wasn't for global warming?
Al Gore said a lot of things that were complete nonsense. We have him on videotape saying that the temperature of the Earth's core is millions of degrees. He's not a scientist. He's not a scientist. In fact, when he was in college, he got barely passing grades in his science classes. This was just his scam. And, his so-called documentary, we really shouldn't call it that. It's science fiction. It's a science fiction film. Over in Great Britain, the courts have ruled that Al Gore's film, Inconvenient Truth, may not be shown in the public schools without reading a list of 11 claims made by Al Gore that have since been proven to be false. And, of course, that does not include the fact...
You're absolutely wrong, Mike. They said they could show that to anybody under the year of age 7.
Okay, I'm sorry, our phone connection's getting a little garbled. Could you repeat that one more time?
What I want to talk about anyway was your idea about gold. I probably agree with you about 99.999%, like what gold is on everything. But I have one thing about gold. First of all, when you talk about, like, America invading different countries in order to take over central banks, in order to elevate the dollar, like, why would that be? Because it seems like America itself is trying to devaluate the dollar. So it seems like such a difference between devaluating and invading countries to elevating.
No, the two are not in conflict. The fact that the federal government's Federal Reserve's inflation is devaluing the dollar is why these other countries don't want to use it anymore as the international trade and reserve currency. So the militarism is all about forcing these other countries to continue using the dollar, even though it's rapidly becoming worthless.
Like Iran and North Korea, like the money that they use in trade and everything is pretty insignificant compared to global trade. And I don't know, I just think that it's not even about like trying to create a central bank to elevate the dollar, because they're purposely trying to devalue it.
It's not on purpose. They're not. Okay, let me get in here and explain what's going on. Nobody is intentionally devaluing the dollar at this time. Now, we know about currency wars where governments will devalue their currency in order to change the balance of trade, and the U.S. did, in fact, do that back in the 1990s, with some rather disastrous results, I might add. The current situation, though, is they can't stop the plunge of the U.S. dollar because it has been so overprinted, nobody trusts it any longer. But the United States enjoys, or more to the point, Wall Street and the Federal Reserve enjoy a tremendous economic advantage while the dollar remains the global trade and reserve currency, because they're basically issuing it and moving it around, and they get a piece of the action off of all of that trade. If countries stop using the dollar, its international demand will plummet, and that will absolutely be the end of the U.S. economy, because the U.S. economy is no longer a productive economy. It's a predatory economy. And that is the reason why these two phenomenon are not contradictory. Nobody's intentionally trying to devalue the dollar right now. Their problem is nobody sees it having any value. And so the U.S. government, as a war agenda, is trying to reimpose the Bretton Woods Agreement on the rest of the world, even though the U.S. government itself violated the Bretton Woods Agreement when Richard Nixon ended gold convertibility in 1971, I think it was. Anyway, let's see. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. I want to get back onto the after effects of Boston. We all know about these secret government lists that you may or may not be on. The no-fly list, the counterterrorism list, terrorist watch list, all of these things, they're highly classified. You don't know you're on them until you try and get on an airplane and they kick you off. And the numbers of people being put on these lists are skyrocketing. On these databases, the number of Americans on these databases has almost doubled in the last 5 years. Almost 1 million Americans are on these lists right now. Many of them entirely by accident, because they have a name that was spelled similarly to somebody that somebody was concerned about. You can be put on this list at a mere whim. Absolute no evidence of wrongdoing. They just think, we should watch this person. And this is getting very, very dangerous here, because now Democrats in the Congress are proposing a new gun bill that will say that anybody who is on the no-fly list or the terrorism watch list is not going to be allowed to own a firearm, even though it is acknowledged that the overwhelming majority of people on these lists, like the overwhelming majority of people in Guantanamo and the overwhelming majority of people underneath these drone strikes, are innocent of any actual wrongdoing. It's a return to Code Napoleon. You're presumed guilty until you can prove you are innocent. And that is not America. Now, obviously, this hard sell on Boston, and now they're coming back. They're waving Sandy Hook at everybody, because now they're saying, oh, what is going to happen to the school? Will they reopen it? Will they tear it down and build a monument? Whatever. And it's all make news to keep Sandy Hook, Boston, terror, guns, evil people. It's just a hard sell on this whole situation. And it's a fear reaction. And I'm not the only one saying that. Over at Ex Republic TV, they have a story. The government fears a public awakening via alternative news sources. Too late. We crossed that threshold a long time ago. Rasmussen is saying most Americans are getting their political news from the independent media, from online sources. And we know the corporate media websites that wanted to adopt the look of the interactive blogs, but went on peddling the same falsehoods, they're not doing well financially at all. Their ad revenues are down. Their readership is down. It's like the way the music industry today copies the sound of the 60s rock and roll, but without the social content, and then they wonder why it's not the runaway success it was in the 60s. Nobody likes a liar is what it comes down to. So we're seeing a flood of stories out there that are going to be used to demonize the independent media, demonize the blogs, demonize the Internet as a whole. There's a story that we linked to over in Baltimore at CBS. 19-year-old caught carrying 2 pipe bombs in a duffel bag. And they're making a big deal out of the fact that he was inspired to build the bombs by a video he saw on YouTube. So now we're going to see a call for overt, officially acknowledged government control of YouTube and the Internet. It's already out there covertly. As Ryan Dawson was saying, he'll put up videos, they get taken down, people just coming to look at the videos, they get a message removed by user. Ryan is the user, he didn't delete them. YouTube is just doing it, and they're lying to visitors to the site as to why it was taken down. Over in Trenton, New Jersey, a man has been sentenced to 9 years in prison for making a bomb, and apparently he made a bomb threat, a phone threat, to a high school in Trenton, disguising his voice in a foreign accent. They won't say what accent he was trying to copy. I'm going to take a wild guess here that he was trying to pretend he was an Arab Muslim. But I'll tell you something we should all be very worried about right now, because up in Montana, somebody stole about 600 pounds of high explosives from a bunker near Red Lodge. BATF is up there looking into it, Carbon County Sheriff's Office looking for it, if anybody has seen anything suspicious. And apparently last month somebody broke into an explosive storage facility owned and operated by the U.S. Forest Service. And they stole all these explosives. Are we getting ready for Boston 2, the escalation? I mean, to me, this seems like an inside job. How many of you even knew the Forest Service keeps huge supplies of explosives on hand, let alone where they are located? Is there going to be a huge bomb blast someplace out in the Midwest, and they're going to say, obviously, they stole the explosives from the Forest Service? But it doesn't make sense. This is a random theft. I didn't know the Forest Service kept high explosives in large volume around. But apparently they do. And, of course, we're getting all these false alarms all over the country. Apparently up in Detroit, there were 2 suspicious packages, and they called out the police and the bomb squad. One of them turned out to be a suitcase owned by a homeless person, and he'd simply abandoned it because the wheel on it broke. And he just dropped it where it was, and that triggered this huge panic. We reported last week where there was a fake phony scare, turned out to be benign here in Honolulu. Since then, we've had 2 more of them here. Just keeping up the fear, keeping up the terror, trying to keep everybody worried. Oh, there's terrorists in our midst. We have to snitch on them. We have to join up with the rat people out, like the program they have down there in Florida. Got $1 million grant to encourage people. If you know of somebody living in our town of Palm Beach who says he hates the government, you've got to turn them in so they can be sent to a mental hospital. Does that include Rush Limbaugh? Because he lives in Palm Beach, and he's on the air every day screaming about how he hates this or that about the government. So, Rush, we'll send you a fruit basket when you're in the Happy Acres home for burned-out radio hosts. We're going to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go to the phones. John in Tennessee. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. First of all, before I get to my main point, it happened here in Nashville. Some homeless people abandoned backpacks and different items, and all of a sudden the bomb squad's called out and they blow up an empty backpack. So you're not alone. It is fear factor. It's facilitation. Listen, the reason I called, Mike, I'm up every morning at about 2 o'clock. On my way into work this morning, I heard Fox News on a 90,000-watt station talking about the dead Boston Marathon bomber's body actually being missing. That it was I guess when they supposedly killed him, they took him to a funeral home, and the family went to claim the body, and now the body is missing. Have you heard anything about that?
I have heard absolutely nothing about that. All I've seen on the corporate media is the cause of death is going to be released later today. I've heard absolutely nothing about the body itself being misplaced.
Well, what was in the little 30-second blurb, Mike, was that the father, I guess in Russia, was insisting on an autopsy and a Boston burial, and the body, no one has seen the body, but they noticed they followed a hearse that had a police escort, and no one knows where the body's at. So I'm wondering what's going on. You know,
I have to be very honest. I think you misheard the report because I'm doing a web search on it.
It gets better, Mike, because when I first did the search, I found the story as I described it to you. Then I left the computer, went back to the computer, and could not find anything talking about the body, Fox News, or anything.
Okay.
And about 20 minutes later, I went back, and it's back on, but it was on the Blaze, of all places.
Well, again, I have heard absolutely nothing about that. So I have really nothing to contribute to that particular topic. So thank you very much. I will take a look over the next commercial break, and we're going to let you go right now. Now, moving on to some of the other things that are going on here. While you're watching Boston, you know, they're trying to ramp up the war with, well, pick a country, any country. They just need a war so bad, we don't even care who it's with. We've got to save the Federal Reserve and declare war on somebody. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who was the chief of staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell under George W. Bush, yesterday came out and stated that the chemical weapons reportedly used in Syria could be an Israeli false flag operation. Gee, you think? Because Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was running an inept regime. And what do you have when you have a leader of a country that has really screwed things up really badly? Oh, terror attack, war. That's how we get out of these messes here. So basically we have these former Bush officials saying, yeah, Israel does this kind of stuff. And the U.S. will go along with it because the U.S. wants to directly, militarily intervene inside Syria, even though polls show the American people are overwhelmingly opposed to any more wars. Earlier this week, there was a poll. Majority of Americans opposed to U.S. military involvement in Syria, even if Assad was using chemical weapons against his own people. Because after all, the United States has nothing to say about that. The U.S. government used a banned illegal chemical weapon against that church full of women and children down there in Waco, Texas. So we lack the moral authority to go out to other countries and say, you shouldn't be doing this. Just like we lack the moral authority to go out to other countries and say, you should not have nuclear weapons of mass destruction, because the United States remains the only country to actually use a nuclear weapon of mass destruction against the civilians of another country. U.S. government's attitude is, our chemical weapons are good, and your chemical weapons are bad. Our nuke's good, your nuke's bad. And nobody's going to go along with that. It doesn't stand for anything. It isn't representative of a drive for world peace. It's all about, we get to use these things and you do not here. Now, speaking of Syria, there's been a major attack on the Damascus airport. Two apparently sizable rockets hit the airport. 200 people are dead. Massive fire. Where those rockets came from, we don't know. Meanwhile, the United States is aiming to have 20,000 troops in Jordan on the border with Syria. I doubt they're going over there to work on their tans. The U.S. government wants a military intervention in Syria. They just can't figure out how to sell it to you. Probably they're going to find love notes from Assad on that laptop they claim belonged to Zohar Tsarnaev or something like that. And nobody's going to believe it. The government has destroyed its own credibility. Meanwhile, over in Iraq, we've been reporting on the escalating incidents of violence, and now Iraqi leaders are basically saying their country is on the verge of a civil war. It looks like the people of Iraq don't like their new U.S.-approved puppet regime and having to sell their oil only for worthless U.S. dollars. Remember when they went into Iraq and we were all told, they will welcome the American troops, they will throw flowers at them, they will kiss them? Well, no. The Iraqis want their country back. They may get it, too. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about events in Iraq. The Iraqi government, the U.S.-approved puppet regime, is saying they're on the verge of a civil war, and if it gets going, could deteriorate as badly as Syria has. Looks like the people of Iraq aren't really all that much better off. Remember, that was a big part of the propaganda. Oh, we're going to invade and take over their country, and life will be so much better for the people of Iraq, or the people of Libya, or the people of any of these other countries we've invaded. And what's the first thing that happens as soon as the new U.S. puppet regime is in place and the new private central bank is in place and the new requirement that all natural resources be sold only for the dollar, the people of those countries start fighting back. Their lives are not better. We've destroyed their nation and their lives, and they're very angry about it. But remember, they only hate us for our freedoms. And that's why the government is planning to save us all from terrorists by taking away what's left of our freedoms here. The Pentagon has announced they're bulking up their bunker buster bomb to combat Iran. Now, these conventional bunker busters we are being shown, like the Moab, are already so large and so heavy, they can barely be carried by our current fleet of bombers. I think what's going on, we know that starting in the Bush administration, the U.S. government embarked on a program of creating a new generation of tactical nuclear weapons. And I think all this talk about the bunker buster and showing us these really big, huge metal things is a cover that the United States government, in order to make sure it gets the fuel rod facility that's buried inside a mountain in Iran, is going to start this next war with nuclear weapons. And they're going to say, no, it wasn't a nuclear weapon. It was just this big Moab thing that we have been showing you in the news all this time. And, the mushroom cloud and the radioactivity, well, that's just because Iran was building nuclear weapons and we set one off. Now then, I have commented before on an organization called MEMRI, the Middle East Media Research Institute, and you need to go out and web search an article called Selective Memory, with memory spelled M-E-M-R-I. Turns out it is an Israeli government propaganda operation. And what it is they set themselves up as a free translation service for the Western media. They will get any articles they can find in the Arab media, and they will translate them, and they will give the translations for free to the Western media, CNN, Fox, ABC, NBC, and so forth. There's only one problem. The translations are intentionally skewed to always make Israel look good and the Arab nations look bad. And so now, as an example of what they're coming up with, MEMRI's latest offering is that an Iranian leader is accusing Jews of engaging in sorcery. I'm not kidding you. That's what MEMRI is saying. The Iranians are accusing the Jews of sorcery, wicked witchcraft, and all the rest of the stuff. They're getting pretty desperate to find some way to demonize the Arab nations. They're just making this stuff up. MEMRI is operating on the same level as the Midnight Sun and the National Enquirer, or at least the Enquirer as it was before Carol Burnett sued them. The Pentagon is also out there reporting that North Korea is still trying to make a nuclear weapon that will reach the United States of America. It's kind of weird. A few weeks ago they were saying they had one. They were going to pop a nuke off over America and destroy all of our computers, and they were going to hit Hawaii, and they were going to hit... Now they're basically saying, well, actually, no, North Korea doesn't have anything that can reach us, but they want one. That's the new definition of the threshold of war. They want weapons. Therefore, we have the right to go in and smash them. Speaking of going in to places where you're not really welcome, Israel once again has violated Lebanon's airspace. They sent 8 warplanes over Lebanon in a span of 14 hours, flying over large parts of the country. I think Israel may have been hoping that Lebanon might take a shot at one of the planes, because then Israel could say, they're attacking us, and go after that Litani River. The fact is, of course, that every one of these overflights by Israel into Lebanon is a violation of their sovereignty, their sovereign airspace. It is a violation of international law. When you send warplanes or warships into somebody else's territory without permission, it's technically an act of war. And Israel's been doing this now for the last couple of weeks, and I think what Israel wants is for somebody in Lebanon to just get so angry about this blatant in-your-face intrusion that they take a shot. And then Israel has the excuse to say, oh, they're shooting at us, they've done this, they've done that, and we'll be up. Remember how Cast Lead started. back in 2008, there had been a 6-month ceasefire with Hamas that Hamas had abided by. The violence had died down, everybody was getting along, everything was peaceful and calm, but Israel does not like peaceful and calm. So on Election Day 2008, when Americans were distracted by President Obama's winning his first term, Israel broke the ceasefire, went into Gaza, started bombing, killed 6 Hamas officials. The next day, the surviving Hamas officials said, well, I guess the ceasefire is over. And Israel said, aha, Hamas has stated the ceasefire is over. And they launched cast lead, dropped white phosphorus all over residential areas in Gaza, on schools, burned the place up. It's banned. It's a banned weapon. It's a banned chemical weapon. And at the time, of course, Israel was saying, oh, we're not using white phosphorus. Those photos of white phosphorus, that's just some Photoshop job by an anti-Semite. And, of course, last week, Israel said, well, yeah, we're going to stop using white phosphorus because it photographs bad. Meanwhile, down in Africa, as they start sizing up what nations need to be invaded to cover the gold bullion shortfall up there at the New York Federal Reserve, AFRICOM is going on a media charm offensive. They're trying to convince all those African nations that this U.S. military buildup in Africa doesn't mean you're going to be invaded. We're there for humanitarian reasons. And they're spending all kinds of money approaching the leadership of these countries and just whining and dining and giving them gifts to say, look, it's cool for us. Really, you want us in your country. We're here for humanitarian reasons. Anyway. One of the lawyers of the Guantanamo inmates, the one who was not suicided, is out there saying that because of the huge embarrassment of Guantanamo, which is building day by day, that the White House is now using the drone strikes as an alternative. We have another terror suspect. Well, we don't want to send him to Guantanamo because that's becoming a hot-button issue, so we'll just drone strike him. But there's an interesting little wrinkle to that. It is now known the vast majority of those inmates at Guantanamo are innocent of any wrongdoing. And worse, it was known they were innocent back in the Bush administration. They just didn't want to let them go because it would be embarrassing to say, hey, we tortured these guys, but they really hadn't done anything after all. And so if the vast majority of the people inside Guantanamo are actually innocent, but still being locked up and presumably tortured, that probably means that most of these drone strike targets are also innocent. And of course, we know that for every drone strike target that gets hit, an average of 50 innocent bystanders gets killed with them. Now, the media is still going into week 3 of the Boston-O-Thon about how terrible these 3 people were killed and all these injuries. But that's small potatoes compared to the effect of one of these drone strikes. 50 dead. And the corporate media, they're Muslims. Who cares about them? The corporate media is only going to report on those things that can be useful to selling you the war agenda, the disarmament agenda. They don't want you to see an alternative point of view. They don't want you to see the horrific damage visited on the rest of the world by the U.S. government, because that might slacken your enthusiasm for more wars. By the way, Jay Leno had just the absolute perfect comment. He was talking on his show about President Obama saying how much trouble he was having shutting down Guantanamo. And Jay Leno said, all you have to do is turn Guantanamo into a small business and tax it out of existence, and it'll be gone in a minute. And over and above that joke is the reality that Guantanamo is a military facility. And President Obama is the commander-in-chief of all U.S. military forces. If he issues an order to shut it down, it will happen. He does not have to go through Congress. He does not have to play the political game. He wants to pose and pretend before all of you Americans that he's trying to shut down Guantanamo. He agrees it's a horrible thing. Obviously, he does not want it shut down. Because those prisoners who are in Guantanamo, if they are returned to a general prison population in the United States of America, or if they are sent back to their homes, because most of them are innocent of any wrongdoing, then it's going to come out. The U.S. was arresting, imprisoning without trial, and torturing innocent people trying to gain politically useful confessions. That's the reason for all the stalls on the Guantanamo military tribunals, up to and including the suiciding of one of the lawyers. We're seeing over the last few weeks, oh, we accidentally sent the defense's computer files to the prosecution. Oh, the defense's computer files have now vanished. We can't find them. Stall after stall after stall, because they know most of these guys are innocent. They can't make a case even before a kangaroo court. Now, of course, pressure is still ratcheting up over just what the heck happened over in Benghazi. And we're seeing this story coming out of GOPUSA.com on how the Obama administration is now bringing pressure onto the witnesses of Benghazi. They're trying to say, well, when you go to Congress, you can't say this and you can't say that. Obvious cover-up. What I think happened in Benghazi is last September, polls showed Obama in a very tight race with Mitt Romney. He needed something to look good. He needed his own version of the October surprise. And I think that what happened is a special operations team was sent into Libya, into Benghazi, to attack the embassy and take the ambassador hostage. And then the media would pump that for day after day after day, just like they're doing with Boston. And then at the last minute, Obama would send in a SEAL team. They'd heroically rescue the ambassador. They'd have a big celebration in Washington, D.C., and the American voters would say, yes, there's a president who knows how to deal with crises. But if you look at the map of where that embassy is located, it's surrounded by residential areas. And what I think happened is, at the first sound of gunfire coming from the embassy, a crowd of Libyans just spontaneously joined in. And it went completely out of control, resulted with the death of the ambassador, and Obama's carefully crafted election publicity stunt turned into an epic fail, and now they're trying to backpedal and keep it all covered up what happened. Apparently, though, another wrinkle has surfaced. This was reported over at Newsmax.com, that apparently the U.S. government hired a group linked to Al-Qaeda to defend the Benghazi mission. The Martyrs Brigade was paid by the U.S. government to provide security at the U.S. diplomatic mission in Benghazi. I thought Al-Qaeda was bad. I thought they were the bad people. Well, they're only bad when the media needs a bad person. Otherwise, when they're on our side in Syria against Assad, they're good people. Playing both sides. Al-Qaeda is going to be the villain when the U.S. media needs a villain to wave at you. And when they're actually aligned against somebody the U.S. wants to bring down, well, then they're good. And they'll get money and they'll get weapons. Now, over in Palestine, the students are rallying together to try and convince Morgan Freeman to basically pull out of an upcoming pro-Israel get-together. It has to do with this May 6th Toronto Awards ceremony, and it's all very pro-Israel and everything, and they're asking Morgan Freeman to basically stand down, not lend his voice to apartheid here. Meanwhile, up in Canada, kind of an interesting story. We're all familiar now with Pamela Geller, who makes her money by running around the country and screaming about how bad the Muslims are, and she puts up all these very offensive and dishonest posters about bad Muslims in all the bus stops. And remember, according to the FBI's own figures, Jewish extremists commit more acts of terror in the United States than Islamic extremists. And presumably that includes all the fake ones being set up by the FBI. But Pamela Geller's job is to keep America thinking that all the terrorists in the world, they're all Muslim. They're all Muslim. If I remember correctly, in the United States of America, for the last year that the FBI had figures, 6% of terror attacks went to the communists. 5% went to the communists, 6% Islamic, 7% Jewish, 42% Latino, 26% what they call the extreme left-wing groups. But Pamela Geller's job is to go out there and sell you all that the primary terrorist group in the United States of America are Muslim, Muslim, Muslim. And apparently up in Canada, there was this rabbi that was going to have Pamela Geller come in and give a presentation at the synagogue. And apparently the police department there said that if this rabbi does that, they would have to seriously rethink his position with the police force as part of the police force clergy. So people are starting to finally stand up and say, you know, this stuff has gone on long enough, all of the lies and fraud and deception about this. By the way, fun story out of Hollywood, Florida. Apparently, Florida sold a building to the Holocaust Museum some years ago, back in, I think it was 2004. And the Holocaust Museum never paid for it. And now Florida is starting foreclosure proceedings on the Holocaust Museum, and the people running the Holocaust Museum, in between screaming anti-Semite and Jew hater and the rest of it, are saying, well, the building wasn't what we thought it was, therefore we shouldn't have to pay you. So that's what's going on down there. Now, last night on The Daily Show, they did a really good presentation poking fun at the Veterans Administration for their complete Charlie Foxtrot in the processing of claims by veterans. And they had some actual veterans on there who had to refile their paperwork 3 and 4 times because it kept getting lost. They were talking about how everything is done on paper at the VA. They've been promising a new computer system for years. It isn't happening. And Sandra B. did this amazing piece of work that really took the VA to task. Maybe it'll guilt them into some action. Maybe not. I'll explain why when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're giving a little tip of the hat to The Daily Show for this wonderfully produced segment on last night's show, just basically holding up the Veterans Affairs Administration to public scorn for the poor handling of the claims from our returning veterans for assistance in dealing with the illnesses and injuries they sustained in service to the United States of America. And whether or not you agree with the wars themselves, and I do not, we as a nation have a moral obligation to care for those kids coming back from the wars for the bankers to deal with the injuries that they have suffered. And following on that, there's this article over at Stripes.com reporting that 30% of the veterans considered at risk for suicide were not getting the follow-up promised by the VA. They're just being ignored. We know suicide has become a huge problem in the current Army. It seems to be linked to this handing out of SSRIs like candy over in the war zones. And we know that contrary to the propaganda and the corporate media and the advertising, that there is a problem with a certain segment of patients on SSRIs all of a sudden tripping out to episodes of suicide, mass violence. We know it's a problem. This is the first war in American history where we're losing more of our kids to suicide than to enemy action. And now they're not even following up on those kids who make it back from the war zone, and they're dealing with SSRI dependency, or they're trying to get off the SSRIs, which can also trigger episodes of suicide. What I think is going on is that in order to control costs into the VA, the delays and the ignoring people is intentional. You want to save costs treating a veteran's wounds, you just wait until he dies. Problem solved. And I know that sounds cold-hearted, but look at the people who sent those kids out there to be killed and crippled in the first place to prop up a banking system. That's how they are. I remember back when the war in Iraq was first getting going and we were all being told, oh, the oil revenues from Iraq will pay for the war. Of course, that was another lie. And then when people started talking about the skyrocketing cost of the war and especially caring for the returning veterans, and Don Rumsfeld literally came out and said, well, our forecast for the post-war costs, assumed more of these kids were going to just die of their injuries. And he said too many of them survived. And we weren't expecting that. Like, your duty as a patriotic soldier is to make sure that when you're shot on the battlefield, you get killed right then and there, so you're not a burden on the U.S. government. And I think maybe some of the lack of action by the VA is just more of that same thing. Hey, we can't, most of these kids, we can't use them anymore. We can't send them back to the war zone. They're just, they're red ink on our balance sheets. Yeah, just lose the paperwork, and they'll go away and die. And it's typical to hear about 6 to 8 month delays between the filing of the paperwork and the offering of care if they don't lose the paperwork. And again, tip of the hat to Daily Show. You guys done good last night. I applaud you. We'll be back after station identification with the lovely Lady Claire. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show for hour number 3. And for those of you watching on Justin TV, this gorgeous creature sitting behind me is the lovely Lady Claire, who joins us on the third hour every Friday with her perspective on what we've been talking about all week. So, Claire, take it away.
Well, there are a couple of issues regarding Iran that I think people need to be paying attention to. As you mentioned earlier in the show, the U.S. government is saying that they've got this marvelous bunker buster, which can target and destroy hardened sites, like some of the nuclear sites in Iran. But I think, Michael, that the timing of the announcement about this, the timing of these kinds of announcements about weapons are never accidental. And let me share with you and our listening audience what's going to be going on. The end of last month, Israel brought their troops into position for a massive military drill very close to the Syrian border, and that will start on the 5th, which is Sunday.
Yes. On
the 6th, the U.S. will be doing another huge military drill in the Persian Gulf with its allies.
I guess this is the U.S. government's Cinco de Mayo gift to Assad.
Oh, dear heavens. And also, you've got the P5+1 plus the Iranian nuclear negotiators who are supposed to meet in Istanbul on the 15th of this month, coupled with the Iranian elections that should be held next month. I think that there's a convergence of events that's a little bit too cute to be called coincidental. Call me silly.
Well, we have seen many times in the past where assets will be pre-positioned, and then the government does a look over their shoulder and say, is the American people with us or not? And because the American people have grown quite skeptical, we see them back off. But again, Boston was obviously intended to reignite war fever and Muslim hate in the American population. It failed.
Yes.
So I think the question has to be asked, if they're moving all of these very expensive assets back into position for strikes on Syria and potentially Iran, are they getting ready for a bigger, bloodier bang to try and get American support for the wars? Obviously, we've got the Kentucky Derby coming up. We understand security has been heightened there. I've seen one report, I have not been able to confirm it yet, that the public are being prohibited from bringing in high-resolution professional-style cameras with them. Cell phone cameras will be allowed, but again, I saw this report that people bringing in ultra-high-resolution cameras, they're not going to be permitted. I don't know why that would be the case. Other than somebody doesn't want the same kind of photographic embarrassments to surface that surfaced after Boston.
Right.
But again, absent a new gigantic explosion or something in the United States of America, the polls are already showing the American people do not support U.S. military involvement in Syria or Iran. We're sick and tired of war. We've had more than 10 years of it. We're tired of seeing our kids come home in those cheap metal boxes covered with those cheap Chinese-made American flags, all for the hegemony of the Federal Reserve note over the rest of planet Earth.
And the thing that makes me very nuts, and I appreciate what you said about making a distinction between the wars in which the civilian government puts our military and our military.
Yes.
These wars are essentially very publicly funded and very publicly fought, ultimately for private corporate gain. And that's what makes me nuts.
All wars are for private gain.
Yeah.
Whether it's, the emperor or the Vatican or whoever starts these wars, there's always a reason for the public to go fight them, and the public pays the costs.
Yes.
And the gain from the war goes to a select few individuals behind the war. And again, one of the reasons I'm a huge fan of Jim Carrey was his movie The Majestic. Because I grew up in a town very much like the fictional town they have in the movie, where, maybe the nation won World War II, but my town, we lost it. And we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And Claire, you wanted to talk about, I think it was Pakistan?
Yes, very important, and getting absolutely or almost no corporate mainstream coverage. The Pakistani...
We're the mainstream.
I know.
Corporate mainstream. Corporate mainstream.
Lamestream.
Okay. All right.
The Pakistani elections, general elections, are due to be held on the 11th of this month. Now, this is a really good thing for the country of Pakistan because between the last election and this, there has not been a military coup. Very good for the Pakistani people. Both of the main parties, the ANP and PPP, are held in high contempt because of their collusion with the U.S. and allowing the drone bombings to continue, which in my world are immoral and illegal. They're terrible things. And there have been assassinations of various candidates, a lot of wet work going on.
Yes.
But the two main candidates are Nawaz Sharif and the former cricketer Imran Khan. Now, if Imran Khan does get elected, the U.S. government is going to have some explaining to do and some reckoning to do, because Khan has taken the position that the drone overflies, if he gets elected, will not happen anymore.
Well, that guarantees he won't be elected, or if he's elected, he'll be shot off the podium when he's being sworn in here.
Yeah.
Do they have Diebold machines over there?
I do not know.
Diebold election systems. We guarantee the results.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But it's interesting, the entire tone and tenor of the Pakistani people has been turned against the United States because of these drone bombings. And it brings to mind another problem with U.S. foreign policy. It doesn't seem, Michael, as though the U.S. government has ever learned how to use aid as a carrot and a stick. Basically, it's just a bribe to allow the U.S. government and military to go in and do everything that the U.S. military wants to do. And that's a problem.
Well, the reason is because, and this is one of the downfalls of a government with a high degree of turnover, is that anybody who's in office is really only thinking in terms of the next 2 years, the next 4 years, the next 6 years,
right.
Or the next 8 years. And what happens after that is just not worth thinking about. So we see these various administrations that go in and say, let's overthrow Iran as they did in 1953. We'll get all these huge oil profits. We'll get a piece of the action and we'll retire happy. And when it all falls apart in 1979, it's not our problem to deal with. The people who started the Federal Reserve 100 years ago, they knew it was a pyramid scam, and they knew it would ultimately destroy the country. Woodrow Wilson, who signed the Federal Reserve Act, wrote in his diary he had destroyed the United States of America. But, hey, I got my pile of cash right now. I get a nice, luxurious, healthy, happy old age, and that's really all that matters. And this is the reason the United States keeps reporting these same, repeating the same foreign policy disasters over and over again. It always works for the people then incumbent in power,
right.
And they're not thinking in terms of the long-term consequences to the nation as a whole.
Yeah, I wish we had some adults in the room in the bowels of power in D.C. who actually thought like that. It would make a tremendous difference in the ability for our country to remain stable, economically and in every other way. But there don't seem to be that many politicians.
No, there
who
aren't.
think that
And
way.
again, this is one of the evils that we have seen come into every single nation enslaved to a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan and interest. They use some of their ill-gotten gains to simply buy themselves the government that supports their scam. Right. Anybody who really seriously wants to change things for the better for the nation or the people, they're simply kicked out. Happened to Cynthia McKinney. Happened to Ron Paul.
Absolutely.
They didn't even try and hide how they railroaded Ron Paul out of the nomination in 2008 and 2012, and the GOP is still trying to say, why didn't anybody vote for our chosen candidate? Well, the attitude of most Republicans, and I'm one of them, if you're not going to give me the candidate I want, don't count on my vote or financial support. But unfortunately, the GOP leadership's attitude for those last two elections is, we'll give you the candidate we want, and you, as a loyal party member, you will vote for this person that we tell you to vote for. No, doesn't work like that here in the United States of America.
No, I wish we had a lot more plurality. in the political process, more parties, because...
Well, that's the way the nation was started. The
Yeah.
two-party system was developed to limit how many bribes to candidates the money junkies had to give.
Right.
You know, before, when the nation was started and you had the Bull Moose Party and you had this party and that party and everything, and the money junkies are saying, oh, how many bribes do I have to pay to all these candidates to bypass the will of the voters? You know, because once a money junkie owns all the candidates in a race, he's basically bypassed the will of the people. Doesn't matter who actually wins, he owns the winner.
Right.
And so as a cost-cutting measure, we came to the two-party system so that any corporation wishing to completely subvert the will of the voters only has to pay out 2 bribes.
Yeah, it's really frustrating, because I consider myself at this point in my life to be a fiscal conservative, but a social progressive. I think we can get more bang for our taxpayer buck by doing things differently. And we are throwing money at programs that make absolutely no sense.
Like the Department of Homeland Security,
yes,
and TSA,
and
FBI, and CIA, all of whom failed in Boston. If you believe the official story, they all failed.
Miserably. Abominably.
Epic fail.
Yes. And where's my candidate? They don't exist. I don't see anyone on the horizon who could give me an alternative that I really feel I could vote for intelligently.
Well, I don't know. I may run for president in 2016. You want to be my campaign manager?
Why not?
All right, we're going to go for that.
Reckless abandon.
Campaign slogan for Rivero in 2016 is, he could hardly do any worse. That's my campaign slogan.
Amen. I think that's a wonderful campaign
Yes.
slogan. Yeah.
All right. Do you have anything else?
I think that was it for
All
today.
right. Well, don't go away because we have a caller on the line. Tom in Texas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Do you have a question for Claire? We lost Tom. We lost Tom. Send out search parties. Put his face on a milk carton right now. All right. Well, I'm going to pull down Claire's microphone, and she's going to head on out of here, and I'm going to get back to some of the talking points. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Now, interesting little statistic talking about war and waste of money. And this gets right back to the issue I was saying the other day when we were talking about the poor performance of the F-35, poor performance of the F-22, these new littoral combat ships, which even the Pentagon says they're too lightly armored to survive an attack. They don't carry enough offensive power to really project across the littoral zone, which is what they're supposedly designed to do. They're not as stealthy as they were supposed to be, and their computer systems are wide open to outside hacking. And I said other countries may not spend as much on the military as the U.S. does, but if they're getting more bang for their buck, it's still going to be a credible military we're going to have to deal with. And again, wonderful movie, Pentagon Wars. I understand it's out there on the Internet in its entirety someplace. Got to take a look at it. Richard Benjamin directed it, did a fabulous, fabulous job on this thing here. Now, back in World War II, big mistake number 2, which was the first time they realized they were going to have to number these things. The U.S. Navy had 30 ships for every 1 admiral. Today, despite all the recent shipbuilding that's been going on with these littoral combat ships and these amphibious assault ships and all the rest of that, we now have more admirals in the U.S. Navy than we even have ships. It's become top-heavy with brass. And all of these admirals, they get all the perks, the flying around on the Gulfstream fours, and, the offices and all the stuff that goes with being an admiral in the United States Navy. Meanwhile, of course, the Navy, to cut costs, is forcing out, or has forced out, 3,000 mid-career sailors. These were career Navy people who were on the career path, and they got to that middle command, middle rank range, and the Navy said, we got to cut costs, we're going to let you all go. I think these 3,000 mid-career sailors were probably a lot more useful to the process of a global force for good, which is the new Navy motto, than all of this surplus of admirals. When you have a Navy that's got more admirals than ships, that's a joke. And it's a reminder that all of this vast amount of money being spent on our military may not be buying a credible military. I know that it is a doctrine of faith in Washington, D.C., that because we have outspent the other guys, we have the best military in the world. It may not be true. We certainly have the most wasteful military in the world, in all of history. But when we look at the actual performance of these very costly, complicated weapon systems, the amount of downtime that they go through because of the poor quality of their systems, we could find ourselves in this conventional war that everybody seems to think is a good idea, and finding ourselves literally being outgunned by very efficient, elegant, simple economic weapon systems on the other side. Meanwhile, there's another scandal that has surfaced from quite a while ago, and we've talked about this before, how under United States law, it is the law in this country, the military can conduct biological weapons tests on American citizens without their knowledge. There was one really bad scandal back in the 1950s where the U.S. government sprayed the city of San Francisco with what they thought was a harmless bacteria, was just going to produce some annoyances, and just by tracking hospital records of people coming in complaining about sneezes and headaches and the rest of it, they would show how quickly this bacteria managed to get inside the buildings following an aerial spraying. Well, it turned out the bacteria was a little more strong than they thought. Some people died from this. Government does this kind of stuff. Now a new scandal has surfaced. When we come back from these commercials, I'll tell you about it. And aloha America, welcome back to the show. And a reminder, the reason these bubbles happen is because this is how those Wall Street money junkies make their vast fortunes. They'll start a bubble. They'll get everybody all hot and bothered to jump onto it, mortgage-backed securities, bundles, student loan bundles, whatever. They'll ride it up to the top. They'll sell out. It crashes. And money has been moved from ordinary American working people, middle-class people, to the pockets of the money junkies, for which nothing of any tangible value has been returned to society. And this is why Alan Greenspan is now admitting they saw the bubble in the 1990s, the real estate mortgage-backed securities bubble, and they did not do anything about it because they all make their fortunes from these things. They're not accidents. They are intentional. It's a pump and dump on a national scale. That's what they're doing here. Now, getting back to this thing, we're talking about the practice of the U.S. government to test out biological weapons delivery systems on the American people. And we were talking about the spraying of San Francisco with this bacteria, which turned out to be a lot more deadly than they thought. People died from that. We know they've dropped off light bulbs full of biological weapons simulants down into the New York subways. They're getting ready apparently to do another one just like that. And always saying, oh, this stuff really isn't all that harmful. You know, you may get a little sick, but it's really all because of the national security here. Well, apparently another scandal has surfaced. Between the years of 1944 and 1961, the military dropped what they called radiation bombs on U.S. cities. Now, they weren't bombs in the sense of exploding. It was simply a canister of finely powdered radioactive materials, so they could then go on down on the ground with radiation counters and just see how it had spread with the prevailing winds. And they dropped these outside U.S. cities in order to see how long it would take for the radiation to be detectable inside the buildings, inside the cities. Because a biological or chemical or radiological weapon that can't get into the buildings, can't get into your home, really doesn't cut it with the Pentagon. And it turns out the total amount of radioactivity dropped on American cities during these experiments was 60 times greater than the release from the 3 Mile Island meltdown. Gee, I wonder what the cancer rates are in these areas around these cities where they conducted these tests. Hey, but not to worry if you've come down with cancer. As long as you've got money or insurance, so we've got the cancer centers, they will take you in and sort of kind of make you all better. So it's a reminder of the true nature of the United States government and the military mindset. You are all their guinea pigs. They test things on you, often without your knowledge. So, anyway. Now, over in Pakistan, as you're probably already aware, there has been basically Musharraf their ex-leader, is accused of masterminding the assassination of Benazir Bhutto. And the prosecutor investigating the murder of Benazir Bhutto just got assassinated, gunned down outside his home. He was also prosecuting militants linked to the 2008 terror attack in the city of Mumbai. I guess he got a little too close to somebody's uncomfortable truth. Now, getting on to the gun grabbers here as we finish out our Friday and heading into the weekend here. Over in Colorado, there is now a recall underway for the 4 Colorado Democrats who took the lead in the push to grab the guns. And the gun grab is definitely already on here. And these particular Colorado Democrats are John Morse, Angela Giron, Evie Hudak, and Mike McClacken. And apparently they're getting a lot of signatures on these things for the recalls. And under Colorado law, these guys can be recalled here. But the gun grabbers are desperate. They know you're angry. They know they have so impoverished you that you have nothing left to lose. They're afraid of you, and they're trying to disarm you. And again, on the corporate media today, they're waving Sandy Hook all over and all the gun statistics. Oh, the guns are bad, and we're seeing this brainwashing going on. There was another one of these schools that was subjected to an unannounced simulation of a mass shooting, traumatized the kids and the teachers. It's not about dealing with a mass shooting. It's about getting everybody scared. Please, Mommy, take the guns away so we can be safe. Kids being thrown out of school for just having a picture of a gun, or even going with the finger and going bang. Obama is back to dropping hints that he's going to enforce his gun ban via executive order, and a reminder that is not a constitutional use of the executive order. The legitimate constitutional purpose of a constitutional order is to enforce the expressed will of the Congress, which is supposed to represent the expressed will of the people. The president can't simply write an executive order and say, this compels the American people to do thus and such. It's null and void. We'll be right back with more about the gun grabbers. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to grab a phone call real quick. Damien in South Carolina. Aloha, Damien. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, how are you? This is first time caller, but I've been listening to you for a long time. Thanks for taking my call. I just heard you talking about government doing little science projects on their lab specimens known as the American people. Mm-hmm. And I work in radiation oncology, and I treat cancer patients. I'm 40 years old. My wife is from the former Soviet Union. She experienced the whole Chernobyl thing. She's from Belarus. And I'm sure you've probably heard of it. There's a book called Dr. Mary's Monkey. And it's about how the whole polio vaccine with SV40 and how she also she wound up getting killed or what have you, or died. But about how all these people with cancer from the SV40 virus could be linked, like you were mentioning the other day, actually, about the kidneys, the virus being grown in the kidneys to then create the vaccines for polio.
Yeah.
And basically how, you can't discount the fact that if the government has done all these other false flags, what other ends would they not stop at in creating these things for financial gain or for just one big lab experiment and see what happens?
It may not even be intentional. I mean, my personal theory of the origin of the HIV virus is because it arose primarily in Africa during the smallpox vaccination campaign. And when during that campaign, they simply set up labs in Africa, which were not clean modern buildings. In some cases, they were grass shacks. They were taking smallpox from cows that happened to have bovine leukemia. They cultured them on the liver from sheep that had the sheep Visna virus. And this is in an era where it wasn't really understood that organisms can spontaneously recombine to form a new life form. And the HIV virus has characteristics from both bovine leukemia and sheep Visna, and I think that's really where it came from. And it wasn't intentional. It's just they weren't being careful about the health quality of the animals they were using for the raw materials for the for the processing of the vaccine. My issue here with this dropping of radiation on the American cities is it was intentional. It was literally a case of, let's just drop this stuff on the American people and see what happens. And if you go back and you look at United States Public Law 95-79. This is Title 50, Chapter 32, Section 1520. It says, the Secretary of Defense may conduct tests and experiments involving the use of chemical and biological warfare agents on civilian populations within the United States. The use of human subjects will be allowed for the testing of chemical and biological agents by the U.S. Department of Defense, accounting to congressional committees with respect to the experiments and studies. In other words, it is U.S. law. They can hit you with a germ or radiation or a chemical agent, look for the reaction, and then go over to Congress and say, well, boy, this really messed up, didn't it? Give us more funding and we'll make it better.
Yeah, and this kind of information being brought to the surface, I tend to disagree with the fact that, I mean, I'm sure there are some things that are accidental, but if it was accidental, they take the accidental discovery and then they use it to their benefit. Like you look at the
there's no question about that. There's no question about that.
And then they turn around and they're like, oh, well, you can't sue us or we won't give you damages. Like with vaccine injuries, they passed a law that you can't sue pharmaceutical companies if you get injured from a vaccine.
That was a rider on the Homeland Security Act.
Right, and it was right around the time when everyone was saying, hey, autism could be caused by these vaccines, and they're like, oh, we got to do something. And then now you look at it, and we've gone from, 1 in 1,000 kids having autism to 1 in 88. My son has autism and Tourette's, and, you know, you ask that question to any physician, they're like, no, they took the mercury out. And it's like, no, you look, there's still thimerosal in there. You ask for the insert on any of these, they still got mercury in them.
That's exactly right. It was supposed to be banned, and then they said, well, we've still got all these vaccines with thimerosal. We can't just throw them away. And the government said, yeah, you can go ahead and use up your stock. And now, of course, it's just, yeah, it's still there. And there is still a good body of evidence linking this mercury-based preservative to autism, but funding to find that link has basically evaporated because what are you going to do once you have the research? You can't sue, you can't recover your money, and it's all about protecting these pharmaceutical industries from these horrible mistakes that they're making and these very dangerous chemicals that they're using. This epidemic of peanut anaphylaxis in the American population coincides with the introduction of peanut oil as a vaccine adjuvant. And peanut oil is something you are supposed to eat. It's not supposed to be injected intravenously into your veins, bypassing the digestive process.
Right. And you couple all that with the fact that, Mike, I'm intimately aware of the cost of cancer treatment. I look at it and I'm like, this cannot be accidental. And they always talk about things like Susan G. Komen, Race for the Cure. And I've gone to these things and I've told these women, I mean, I graduated from grad school at UNC, and I'm talking to these women and I said, we've gone, through lab studies and whatnot. And I've told these people, I'm like, you're never going to find a cure for all these different forms of breast cancer, the stages and whatnot. And, what you should be pushing for is the cause. Find the cause of cancer. And then we can tell people, don't do this, or this will, this is what's causing the cancer. But you never see a fundraiser for finding out the cause of something.
No, you don't.
And fundraiser to get the money to fund all the treatments, which are perpetual.
That's exactly right. Nobody wants a cure, because if you have, a case of the creeping trots or something, and I cure you, you go away, and I don't make any more money off of you. And so for all this talk about finding a cure, nobody is looking for cures to disease. They're looking for treatments. They're looking for something that you will take month after month, year after year, for the rest of your life, a permanent, guaranteed revenue stream for the pharmaceutical industries and the hospital. And
one more thing, I'm going to let you go, but listen to this. You talk about how your bankers, and this is God's honest truth, because I have a brother who works for J.P. Morgan, and he explained it all to me. He knows what's going on. I can't understand why he still works for them. But basically, he said that it's just like what you said, where the bank, if they didn't have usury, everyone would pay their homes off in 5 to 10 years. We'd own our homes. We wouldn't have property taxes, and we'd actually have physical, personal property that was, not eternal, but perpetual source of equity for us, in our lives to, pass down to our children, whatever, or use as an investment, et cetera. But instead, they want us on a 30-year note where if we borrow $150,000, we wind up paying them over $300,000 back.
That's
and
exactly
I believe that, the same masterminds, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Morgans, and the Rothschilds, all these people, they're like, they have so many irons in the fires to generate them money. And if it's $100 or $200 billion a year in oncology, funds they're bringing in with their pharmaceuticals, like from the Flexner report 100 years ago to push that kind of medicine, and then everything else, and they're banking with mortgages and inflating stock market, so nobody, with Ben Bernanke doing the $40 billion a month in monetizing, nobody is going to invest in a CD at 3 or 4 or 5% because it's not there. So they all have to go in the stock market. They game the system on every single angle.
Yes,
there
they do.
is. I mean, you go and buy gold and silver, and what do? They drive the market down because they owe Germany all their gold back. So what do? They screw all of us who are at, $50 an ounce on silver. Now we're down to 23 again. And same with gold, and they're doing it just to game it for themselves,
They absolutely are. Now, the good news is that gold is already recovering from that smash down a week ago, and it did not succeed in scaring us all into running down to the gold dealer and dumping our physical so that the private central banks could scoop it up to cover their shortfalls. Quite the opposite happened. Demand for physical among ordinary people went through the roof. They're taking advantage of the low prices because they know it's going to go up. And getting back to this thing about the health industry and, Susan Komen's The Race for the Cure. They don't want a cure. They want new diagnostic tests they can sell you. They want new treatments. They knew whatever. And apparently the actual statistics are the incidence of breast cancer in women is on the rise.
Yes,
and
you're absolutely right.
It turns out they have found that most breast cancers will go away themselves. Most people who get cancer and don't realize it, their body succeeds in getting rid of it. But it's a big business to say, oh, you've got this, you have to come in, and you have to have radiation, and you have to have chemotherapy. And now they're coming out and saying, well, the radiation may burn out that cancer, but the radiation is going to trigger further cancers in your body. Chemotherapy actually makes, if you have a resurgence of the cancer, it comes back far more aggressive and metastatic. And anything that is a threat to that, whether it's hydrazine sulfate or Laetrile, because it's low cost, it has to be driven out of business because it's all about extracting the maximum work product from the American people by hook or by crook. That is fascism.
Yes, it is. It is absolutely fascism. And when you have the FDA, who is the ultimate arm of that branch of the fascism, covering all the bases of what can and cannot be approved, and, like vitamin B12, they don't want anyone using that to treat when it's been proven in other countries they use it, and it has great success, versus all sorts of horrible chemotherapy agents, although B12 can be dangerous too if not used properly, but they don't even offer that to options to, patients in this country. And, the number of kids with cancer today, I'm from Vermont. I did all my internships at Mass General and the Harvard Joint Center. Mm-hmm. And I remember then in the 90s when they told us, so like the number of kids with cancer now versus in the early 1900s, it's just ridiculous. And it's just like with autism. And you get these pundits for, for the people who are causing all this to say, oh, well, it just wasn't being recorded and it wasn't documented. It's like, are you kidding me? You think someone would have been writing about all these kids with autism or with cancer or with problems back in the 1900s? I mean, they were writing stuff back in the 1600s and 1500s, Like, don't tell me that it just wasn't documented. You can't have 1 in 88 kids with autism in 1920 and not have some form of documentation that pushed that number more than 1 in 1,000,
You're absolutely right about that. We know that a lot of our modern ills were not the problems they were in medieval or even ancient times. They've gone back and done statistical studies of recovered bodies, all the way back to including the Iceman, all of the Egyptian mummies, everybody they find in the peat box, and they're finding out the incidence of cancer was very, very, very low compared to modern time. But as you say, nobody wants to find the cause of cancer because it shuts off the money flow. Nobody wants a cure to anything. The common cold is a good example. Nobody wants to cure the common cold. It's almost like this cultural icon, they can't find the cure for the common cold. They don't want it. Because the model is you get a cold, you go down to your pharmacy, you buy a cold treatment. You take it, and they say, okay, you're better. You go back to work, you infect other people, they go to the pharmacy, they get a cold treatment, they come back to work, they go to church, they go to school, they spread it around, and it's a huge money-making operation. Nobody in our medical establishment wants to cure anything because it shuts off the money flow. Remember when AIDS first started erupting and everybody was screaming about AIDS and how scary it was. And there was all this money, we need a cure to AIDS. Nobody found a cure for AIDS. It's treatment after treatment after treatment after treatment. Because the business model is they will get you on these prescription medications that you will take every day of your life for the rest of your life, guaranteed flow of money to the pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, unless, of course, you're Magic Johnson, who's had AIDS for how long now?
Yeah, and he's doing fine. You know, he's not.
Magic Johnson doesn't look any different than the day he came out and did the press conference saying he was positive.
Yeah, well, he's HIV positive, but he's not symptomatic, and that's one of the reasons to wonder if there really is a link between that particular virus and the AIDS symptoms. Because if you go back and you look at how the Pasteur Institute was just rushing to declare that they had found the cause of AIDS, and they took some shortcuts, and they may have missed. And it's kind of interesting. We should bring this up because there's a show on TV. It's hosted by John Noble, who went on to do Fringe. And I forget the name of this show, but they did a segment on Louis Pasteur about how when he came out with his rabies vaccine, he lied. He told everybody he had cured 50 dogs with this vaccine, and he hadn't. And they just shot up this kid, and he lucked out. It turned out his vaccine worked, but, you know, under this desire for profitability and to beat other scientists to publication, they take these horrible shortcuts. Okay?
Well, you know that Jonas Salk's vaccine it was hardly ever used. It was done laboratory, and then they brought it out, and they found out it was killing some of their test subjects. And the guy who was promoting it, I forget, I heard the story on a talk show similar to yours, and this guy, he was doing the documentary on it, and it turned out that this wealthy guy who was promoting Salk's approach to the polio vaccine, he said, I'm going to inject they were going to pull it, and he said, I'm going to inject my grandson with it right now, and you'll see, and his grandson died. And that a derivative of something else was used in for the polio vaccine after that. But it's the same thing with, oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank now.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to cut you off here because we've got one more caller and we're almost out of time here. But I want to point out something that most people don't understand. Over time, illnesses evolve to be less harmful because an infecting agent that kills its host ends its own ability to reproduce and spread beyond that particular host. And so when measles first appeared, it was a slate wiper, was killing people. These days, it's a childhood annoyance. Over time, illnesses tend to trend down in terms of their effect. A pathogen that kills its host is evolutionary failure. And a lot of diseases, over time, they just sort of burn themselves out and go away. And the doctors like to take credit for it. Got to let you go, Damien. We're going to grab Tom in Texas who called back. Tom, real quick before the commercial break, what's on your mind?
Hey, Pauhana Friday, bro.
Oh, Pauhana yourself.
Yes. Thanks for bringing me back. That milk carton thing worked. I appreciate it, man.
Oh, well, while you're there, can you get me some cottage cheese? Because I'm about ready to harvest a pineapple out of my pineapple plantation.
Oh, no kidding. I've got strawberries and blueberries and blackberries to go with it.
Good for you. Good for you.
A little bit of cinnamon and sugar. Oh, yeah. But actually what was on my mind several times on your show and your blog there, I noticed they were talking about absolving the Constitution.
Yes.
You were saying it was a good thing.
Well, I was saying that tongue-in-cheek because the authority of the federal government over the American people rests on the Constitution. If they throw it in the shredder, the federal government becomes null and void. Of course, they don't see it that way, but that's the reality. That Constitution is the contract by which we, the people, allow the federal government to run our nation, supposedly for our benefit. If the federal government tosses the Constitution out, they've basically torn up their own contract, and they instantly become illegitimate. Not that they're all that legitimate now, but that's basically where we're at. Okay.
Well, My thought is, okay, they're not going to actually throw it in the shredder. What they're going to do is they're going to rewrite it in about 1,700 pages in there or whatever. It's going to be something in there that says, I am God and you will worship me, and if you don't, your life will be miserable.
Well, I'm not going to sign that contract. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Tom. We'll be right back.
In New York City.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And as we head into this last segment of the Friday show before the weekend, I want to leave you with something to think about. History has shown that the honest man loses to the teller of white lies, who loses to the teller of black lies, who loses to the cheat, who loses to the thief, who loses to the extortionist, who loses to the murderer, who loses to the drug lord, who loses to the genocidal tyrant. The question in these dark times is not what is the U.S. government capable of, but what is the U.S. government not capable of. History has shown the government has an attitude of anything they need to do to achieve their agenda, to achieve their ends, is permissible. And we rely on the blind faith of the American people in the goodness of government so they won't see it. Nothing protects a government conspiracy more powerfully than the faith of the people that government couldn't possibly ever do anything that evil. And so when a government engages in a fraud or a conspiracy against the people, by default, they have to go into that realm of those actions the people simply cannot believe the government capable of. And that is where they live and shape history. Now, we know that military assets are being moved around, repositioned around Syria and Iran. We know wars with those countries are still on the agenda. We know last year Obama set a timeline of June for war with Iran. If Boston's agenda was to reignite the war fever against the evil Muslims and the American people, it has failed. And failed miserably. And so is our government considering at this very moment something grander and bloodier with which to scare us back into throwing our babies onto the designated enemy's bayonets? Of course they are. That's how they operate. Every war in history was started with a lie, with a fraud, with a deception, with a false flag. The U.S. government is very much aware they are dealing with a skeptical population. The American people are looking for reasons to doubt the official story. They don't accept anything on faith any longer. The polls continue to show that erosion of trust. And so our government may be considering doing something so horrific, so shocking, people won't dare take the risk it's not true. They'll be numbed by it. Their brain will be disconnected by it. Like the original 9/11 that just delivered a psychic shock to the entire nation to an extent that obviously Boston failed to do. So we need to be vigilant. We need to be aware that our government lies to us, loots us, enslaves us, treats us as livestock. What will they do next? We can only wait. Have a good weekend. We'll be back here on Monday on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe. Have a good weekend. Please reach out to those people who are asking questions but don't have the answers. Invite them to join us here at Republic Broadcasting, whatreallyhappened.com. Please support both of us. We don't have the millions of dollars that are being poured into the professional liars. We need your help. Have a good weekend. Aloha, America.